Students. This is Sarmad Latif, and today we will study a new chapter, which is climate change and global warming. This chapter explains climate change and global warming, which are very important environmental problems today globally, not only in a specific country like Iraq. Climate change means long-term changes in temperature, in rainfall, in wind, and even in weather patterns on the Earth, while global warming means an increase in the average temperature of the Earth. Usually, these changes affect nature, affects the ecosystem, affects humans, affects animals, affects plants, agriculture, water, and even basically the economy of the country. Scientists believe that human activities are the main reason for climate change. There are a lot of narratives about climate change, different narratives by different scientists and different backgrounds of science. Activities like burning oil, gas, and coal production that trap heat in the atmosphere are main activities that is considered to cause climate change. This causes the Earth to become warmer, over time. It takes time, actually. It's the result of decades of human activities. So understanding climate change help us know how to protect our environment and how to reduce the damage that is happening in the future. So in this chapter, we will learn the cause of climate change, its impact on environment, its impact on society, and its situation in Iraq, and possible solutions. Climate change is not only a scientific issue, but also it's a social issue, it's an economical issue, it's even political issue. So every country must work together to reduce its effect because this issue is a global issue. So a single country cannot control it. So students should understand this topic because it affects our future life, it affects our food security, it affects our water resources, and even public health. Um, you know, in this chapter, as we said, we will study several important topics related to climate change and global warming. First, we will look at, the basic meaning of climate change and global warming. Then we will study the greenhouse effect, which is the main reason for global warming. We can see this. And after that, we will discuss the impact of climate change on environment, such as rising sea level, droughts, and even extreme weather. Extreme weather could be flood, it could be drought. Both are extreme, but in opposite direction. We will also study how global warming affect human society, including agriculture, health, water supply, and even economy. So another important topic is climate change in Iraq, because Iraq is highly affected by high temperature and even water shortages. You will hear it in the news a lot, especially in the southern part. We will also study how why Iraq is vulnerable to climate change and what problems the country is facing. And we will also discuss two different strategies, which is mitigation and adaptation strategy for climate change. Mitigation means reducing the causes of climate change, while adaptation means adjusting to the new reality. At the end, we will discuss some recommendation and call for action because solving climate change requires cooperation between the countries, between governments, between scientists, and even society. Okay, so usually, climate change means, there is like a different meaning of climate change and global warming. They are not same actually. Climate change means long-term change in weather condition, such as temperature, such as rainfall, humidity, and even wind pattern. These changes usually happens very slowly, over many years or even many decades, actually, not only years. While, global warming is a part of climate change and means increase in Earth's average temperature. So the Earth is becoming warmer because of our activities like human. We burn fossil fuels, we cut forests, and we have industrial productions. So let's say like when fossil fuels such as oil and gas are burned, they release gases into the atmosphere. These gases trap heat and make the earth warmer. So climate change can cause serious problems like the problems that we are facing now, like droughts. Last year and some years in Iraq and even in Kurdistan region, we are struggling with droughts, having less rain than usual. Or sometimes we struggle due to flood. Flood happening in Soleimani, in Erbil, in some other places in Iraq, and cause this is a natural disaster and will have impact on human life and even the destruction of the infrastructure. We have also heat wave, even strong storms. It also affect the agriculture. It also affect water supply and even human health. Some natural factors can influence climate change, but usually scientists agree that human activities are the main reason today. Understanding climate change help us to find solution in order to reduce the damage and protect future generations because when it comes to environmental science, when it comes to the science of water, when it comes to studying these main topics, it's important to think about protecting future generations' life, not only about our the period of life. So it's important for you, a student, to understand the difference between climate change and global warming because many people confuse and believe that they are same, but actually global warming is only one part of climate change. Climate change is a broader area. Okay, so the greenhouse, many of you have heard greenhouse gases or greenhouse effect, it's a natural process that keeps Earth warm and suitable for life. Sunlight enters the Earth's atmosphere and reach the surface of the Earth. So the Earth absorbs some of this energy and reflects the rest as heat. Some gases in the atmosphere trap this heat and prevent it from escaping into the space. Usually, these gases are called greenhouse gases. So, without greenhouse effect, the Earth would be too cold for humans, for animals, and even for plants. So, but human activities have increased the amount of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This causes too much heat to be trapped. It leads to the global warming that we are discussing it now. So the main greenhouse gases include carbon dioxide, methane, other oxide and gases. Usually carbon dioxide mainly comes from burning fossil fuel and cutting trees. Methane comes from the agriculture and animals. We also have like some other oxide from fertilizers, from farming activity. And when the amount of these gases increases, the earth become warmer, which leads to climate change and even other environmental problem. Climate change affect the natural environment in many ways. One major impact is rising sea level. When global temperature increases, ice in polar regions will melt and ocean water expands. So this situation will cause sea level to rise and even may flood coastal areas. Another impact is extreme weather events such as strong storms, such as droughts, floods, and even heat waves. Usually, these events may damage ecosystem and reduce biodiversity. Many plants and animals cannot adapt quickly to climate change. So some species may disappear, which affect the biodiversity. And climate change also affect the ecosystem by changing natural habitats. Some animals may move to new location. We have animal or birds migration, which can disturb the food change. Forests, we have wetlands and even ocean they are very sensitive to climate change, cannot be easily adapted. So changes in temperature and rainfall can damage this ecosystem. That's why, protecting the environment requires reducing greenhouse gases emission and using natural resources sustainably. If climate change continues, environmental damage may become more severe in the future. That's why now in many places, including like in Soleimani, in Erbil, in some other parts of Iraq, we are focusing on sustainable energy. We are focusing on solar panel. We are focusing on the clean energy instead of the one that affect the environment. And that's a global image actually. Okay, so you know, effect of global warming on human society. Usually, global warming affects our life in many ways. One important effect is on agriculture. Farmers depend on stable weather condition to grow their crops. Climate change can cause droughts, as we said, can cause floods, and even the changes in the temperature, which will reduce the crop production, and it makes a lot of trouble and problems for the farmers. This can lead to food shortage also. So global warming also affect our health. High temperature can cause heat stress and dehydration. That's why some years we see in Basra, in Baghdad, some people die because of the heat attack, actually. Climate change can also increase the spread of disease like malaria, like fever, and other health issues as well. Water resources are like highly affected. Many regions experience water shortage because of rainfall patterns. Rainfall patterns are changing. So some rivers and lakes may become smaller, and climate change also affect the economy of the country, overall. So extreme weather events will damage buildings, will damage roads, and even infrastructure. For those who have like civil backgrounds, they understand better how climate change affect these infrastructures. That's why, governments must spend more money and dedicate more budget to repair these damages. And it causes other problems for the policymakers. So some people may lose their job because of, agriculture and industries are highly affected by climate change. Of course, this is in a long-term pattern. And therefore, we can see that climate change is not only environmental problem. It could be a social problem. It could be economical problem that affect even our health. Here we can see uh, the tragedy of climate change. We can see the migration. We can see the food destruction. Water scarcity and other health issues that affect our life. Okay, so Iraq has a hot and dry climate uh, with large desert areas. So desertification is one of the problem we have in Iraq. Iraq has in recent decades actually mainly. Iraq has experienced increase in temperature and decrease in rainfall. Many studies show that average temperature in Iraq has increased more than 1 degree Celsius in the last 50 years. So this change may seem maybe small for us, but actually it has a large impact on environment and even on our water resources. Iraq already suffers from water shortages despite having two big rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. And climate change makes this problem even worse. Droughts are becoming more frequent and more severe. Rainfall is decreasing, which reduces the availability of water for our daily life, for agriculture, for industrial activities as well. The rivers we have, Tigris and Euphrates, provide most of Iraq's water, but water flow has decreased due to the climate change and even upstream water policy by other countries. I mean, the upstream countries. So agriculture is highly affected because crops need water. We also use the traditional agriculture method as we discussed previously. Reducing rain and high temperature increase desertification as well, which means the lands will become dry and less productive. So, it's a serious challenge for Iraq's future development. Um, okay, so Iraq is considered highly vulnerable to climate change because of its natural condition and water dependency, as we said. So desertification is one of the major problems. Large areas of land are becoming dry and losing fertility. High temperature increases evaporation. We already discussed, these fundamental, which reduce even the soil moisture. It's not only reduce the amount of water, it reduce with the soil moisture as well, which affect, the water amount in the soil and underground. Heat waves are becoming more frequent, especially during summer. Agriculture is very sensitive to climate change. We said, important crops such as wheat, you know, and barely needs suitable temperature and water actually. Some other food like rice needs a lot of water. That's why some years in Iraq it will be avoided for the farmers to plant rice and to have these type of crops that needs a lot of water. Cities also, face challenges such as water scarcity and even air pollution. High temperature increase the electricity demand for cooling system. Water shortage affect our daily life and even the sanitation. So poor environmental management can increase vulnerability to climate change. That's why Iraq needs strong environmental policies and better resources management. So understanding vulnerability will help us to have a better adaptation plan strategy in order to reduce the risks and protect our society. Okay, so we mainly have these two strategy, mitigation and adaptation. You know, these two main ways are the main strategies to address climate change, actually, mitigation and adaptation. Usually, mitigation means reducing the causes of climate change. It includes, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, using renewable energies, as I said, such as solar and wind power, and improving energy efficiency. Planting trees also help to reduce carbon dioxide in the atmosphere because they absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen, as you know. So adaptation means, this what's about mitigation. But when it comes to adaptation, it means adjusting systems to reduce the damage from climate change. Examples include, for example, improving water management, developing drought resistant crops, and even, we talked about the drip irrigation method, which is very helpful in the age of climate change. Also, designing strong infrastructure can help in this matter. Iraq has started some project related to renewable energy and water management, but they are in a small scale that does not really have big impact for the current situation. So because many challenges still exist, such as lack of funding, lack of enough technology, and even environmental awareness among society. So usually, government policies should support sustainable development and environmental protection for the current situation. Can also help by saving energy, reducing wastes, and even protecting natural resources. That's why we have this course, and we try to raise our awareness about what's happening to our environment and how to protect it for now and even for the future generations. So, combining mitigation and adaptation strategies can reduce future climate risks and protect our environment. Okay, so this is an article that I was written it as a call for action. I have mentioned some Iraq's water crisis and some environmental challenges we face, and there is a need for for taking action in order to prevent these issues and reduce their impacts on our environment, on our health, on our daily life, and even for the future generations. Okay, so Iraq is currently facing serious environmental challenges, as we said, especially water scarcity. Water reserves have decreased to very low level in recent years. Some wetlands in southern Iraq have dried completely. You can see that Iraq's water reserve have dropped to less than 8 billion cubic meters, which is the lowest level in the past 80 years. Actually, they are alarming statistics. We have it. This was about, I think, 2025. Okay. Environmental mitigation in the south, in south of Iraq, we have lost in many wetlands, including the marshes, Iraq's marshlands. These marshlands will have a huge impact on the life of people living in those areas. We have lost a lot of birds. We have lost a lot of animals, for example, buffalo is one of the great resource that, we have special milk production by these buffalo that is a very, very great fortune for this country. So this is not only, economic loss, but it's also cultural heritage because these, Iraqis marshlands have been listed in UNESCO World Heritage. I think in 2016. So it must be protected actually, but unfortunately we are losing it year by year. Okay, so poor management and blame game. Well, this is one of our big problem, in Iraq. And instead of taking action, many people in the water sector blame climate change, and even they blame the policy of upstream countries. So just to hide, their failure to manage these resources. This is one of the biggest problem we have in this country. That's why we need to be aware on that and try to enhance it. Okay, so management problem is one of the it's one of the struggling area for us. Lack of qualified expert in environmental and water sector is one of the key problem we have it. Scientific knowledge is very important to solve complex environmental problems. When decision makers do not have enough expertise, the policy will fail. Rivers in Iraq facing pollution problems, pollution affect public health and agriculture. Strong cooperation between countries, that they share in the same rivers is very important. And the policymakers must have enough knowledge and scientific background in this regards. The agreement between Iraq and upstream countries should ensure fair water distribution. Temporary agreement may only help in a very short-term period, but long-term solution is very important for us. So government should invest in research, in technology, in environmental education. Then we can have a proper management that can reduce the damage caused by climate change. Okay. So, water shortage, or let's say water scarcity, affect infrastructure and even energy production. Some power plants depend on water for cooling processes. So when water is not available, electricity production will decrease. And this is what happened to us actually. In some cities, people depend on tanker water because public water supply is insufficient. And this is happening to us some years. So when we don't have access to water at our houses, apartments, we call for tanker to come and provide us water. So this shows actually weakness in water infrastructure system. Another problem is water waste. Water consumption per person is much higher than the recommended levels. Based on some statistics in Baghdad, usually based on World Health Organization, they recommend only 100 to 100 liters per person, or sometimes 200 liters per person daily for every needs. But in Iraq, this range in Baghdad is 600. That means 3 or 4 times higher than the amount of need of individual. In Kurdistan region also, based on a statistic I have seen, it's 400. So what that mean? That mean we don't have enough awareness and we don't take enough responsibility to deal with water and other environmental resources. That's why we need to raise our awareness. So, in conclusion, there might be some recommendations, to reduce climate change impact. We need to like take some actions. For example, reducing greenhouse gas emission is very important by using renewable energy sources such as solar and wind energy. Unfortunately, we see some efforts in this regards. Also protecting natural resources such as water, forests, and soil are very important. Improving international cooperation between countries to manage shared water resources. In Iraq, we share in Tigris and Euphrates with Turkey, with Iran, and somehow Syria. So, because climate change is a global problem. So, without cooperation, we cannot manage our natural resources, actually, especially water. So, education is very important. Students and society should understand environmental problems and their solutions. So, sustainable practices such as saving energy and reducing waste should be motivated. So government should create strong environmental policies and support scientific research. So every individual, each of us will have responsibility to protect our environment and even for the future generation. And that's all for this chapter. Hope you enjoyed and learned, and have a great day.